We have the final section of the first book of Kings today, which is chapters 21 and 22. And we find out here answer the question left at the end of the last video of, does Ahab actually redeem himself? And the answer is, perhaps unsurprisingly, no. We open this section with Ahab's, this bit of land near his castle or whatever, that he wants to grow some vegetables in or something like that. But the owner doesn't want to sell it to him. So Ahab's response, despite being the king, oddly, is to go away and sulk. It's a bit of a red flag there, I think, isn't it? I mean, I'm a big believer, give a man 30 minutes to sulk when things haven't quite gone his way, but that's enough. 30 minutes and go get on with it. It seems this sulk goes on a little bit longer than that. His wife Jezebel, anyway, being sort of kindly in wife terms, I suppose, to some extent, but a bit of a psychopath, says she will get the land for him, and then goes and organises things and manoeuvres things in such a way that the end result is that the current landowner is killed. Ahab then, of course, ends up getting his land. Elijah, however, comes to him and says, yeah, that wasn't cool, and does the speech about what's going to happen to your family is the same as what happened to Jeroboam's and Bashar's, i.e. that they're all going to be killed and the dogs are going to eat them in the streets. Again, that being apparently a particularly terrible fate to have been eaten by a dog after you're dead. I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't appeal to me. If I die, I don't want to be eaten by a dog, but I don't really care. I mean, I'm not in that thing, so, it's not the end of the world. Apparently that was a particularly big deal, so that's pretty terrible for them. King Ahab's reaction, anyway, is he's pretty upset by this. He tears his clothes and he fasts and he says he goes around meekly. So God says to Elijah, have you noticed how actually, in being given this news, Ahab has actually humbled himself? And God seems to quite like this. So he decides to sort of semi-spare him, as in his family is still all going to be killed and eaten by dogs. But he's going to defer that punishment until after Ahab has died. We then finally come back to Jehoshaphat, the king who is descended down the line of David. So, kind of important, but he's hardly been in it. He, at this point, it said, is friendly with the king of the other part of Israel, the bigger part. Annoyingly, the Bible omits to name the king at this point, which is really weird because we've been talking about all those other kings, so we're not quite sure which one it is. They decide anyway that in collusion together, they're going to go and take some land back from Aram, which they seem to have lost at some stage. I don't quite get this because in the previous video, Elijah was told he needs to appoint a new king of Aram, but it sounds like Aram has nothing to do with them anyway, so yeah, not quite sure. Quite sensibly, however, Jehoshaphat and whoever the other king of the other bit of Israel is, they decide that it would be a good idea to get a prophet and put this idea past God to check that he's on board with it. I quite like that. So they find this prophet called Micaiah, I don't know. But the king of Israel, the other one who's not Jehoshaphat, is a bit sulky about this. He says this prophet doesn't like him because he's always prophesying bad things about him. Micaiah, whatever his name is anyway. He has a bit of an odd story in that he seems to say that, I think, to Jehoshaphat, and it sounds like Ahab, so perhaps that does solve the mystery actually of which other king we are looking at, that he's seen a vision of God in his throne room surrounded by the multitudes of heaven, and God is looking for volunteers for one of these spirits in heaven to come down and convince Ahab to go to war against Aram to get the land back, despite the fact it's going to get him killed. It's sort of terribly confusing because Ahab's not long fought Ben-Hadad of Aram and beaten him, so I don't quite get it at all. And why we're suddenly referring to Ahab and we were referring to an unnamed king of Israel before. Not sure. But anyway, this spirit volunteers, it comes to God, and God says, how are you going to achieve this? And the spirit says, I shall be deceitful, and I shall put false words in the mouths of the king's prophets, i.e. to sort of lead him astray, to make him think this is a good idea, despite the fact it's going to get him killed. Again, none of this would make sense if this was being said to Ahab, but the net result is that Micaiah ends up being put in jail by Ahab. He doesn't like it. It sounds like the battle goes ahead anyway, and as expected, Ahab is killed. It's all particularly, I mean, I say that all the time, don't I? I realise that. There are degrees of oddness, I guess, and they're all towards the higher end of the spectrum, but this one, certainly unusual to have some sort of vision of God's throne room. That's very strange. It's then noted anyway that Jehoshaphat dies, as does Ahab. Not clear at all still if Jehoshaphat was a good king or a bad king. He's succeeded by his son. We don't know if his son is any good or not. But Ahab's son, perhaps unsurprisingly, we are told is a bit of a punk. So in the short version of that short version, basically Ahab and Jehoshaphat go into battle together to retake some land. Ahab is killed as planned and expected. They both then succeeded, and some really weird stuff happened with a vision of heaven, maybe? Don't know. So in terms of the interesting points to pull out of that, we have Ahab, who I thought maybe had redeemed himself, but clearly hadn't, so carried on just being a total punk, despite knowing God exists, and obviously ends up with a not a particularly nice end. But actually, I think worse than that, and even going further, is that he then sort of slightly redeems himself by humbling himself, so God defers his punishment. I mean, he still gets killed in battle, but it sounds like he doesn't get eaten by dogs. But his family all do. So he's succeeded by his son, who's then a punk. We've been told that at some stage they're all going to be killed and eaten by dogs in the street. And yeah, sure, fair enough. It sounds like his son's a punk, so maybe the rest of them are punks and they're going to be punished for that. But it sounds like they are being punished for what Ahab did. But how unfair is that? I mean, he was a total punk, and then his family are going to get killed after he's died because of what he did. I guess there's an argument that had his family been wonderful people, they probably would have been spared, I suppose. But yeah, there's a difficult angle on justice in that, isn't there? But there we go. The second point, anyway, is this multitudes of heaven business. And we looked at this before. I can't think where it was, but why does God need humans if he's got a throne room full of sentient beings? What do human beings add to the equation? I don't quite get it. I guess one of the obvious questions are, potentially, could those people, the multitudes of heaven, be the people who used to live down here and died and went up there? It's not the most appealing idea of heaven, is it? That you get to go and sit around the throne room waiting for God to throw out a job, and you think, oh yeah, I'll take that one, and go and volunteer and then go and deceive people to get them killed. I mean, we've no clue what heaven is at this point anyway, or even if there is one. But if that's it, then that's not particularly appealing. I suppose the other possibility is that the multitudes of heaven are non-self-aware spirits or something, so they're not as fulfilling to God to have a relationship with, because they're sort of, I don't know, sort of super beings, but a lower level of self-consciousness, or that's getting deep and metaphysical anyway, isn't it? Anyway, so that is the end of the book of 1 Kings. So the next video will be the summary of that, if I can find some angle for summarising that. But then onwards we will go to the book of 2 Kings and see what happens there.